Please welcome to the stage Glenn Nye of CSPC and our esteemed panel.
Good morning. It's my pleasure to moderate a discussion today on strengthening trust in institutions. I'm moderating the panel from the perspective of someone who runs an American think tank that's studying the American political system and the health of our democracy. And we're in challenging times, I think, to say the least. Looking at it just from a U.S. perspective, contextually, we are working through some challenges to our democracy that are best solved when trust in institutions exists. But unfortunately, we are experiencing a time of historic low faith in American political institutions. In fact, among our governing institutions, only the military remains in the positive territory in terms of Americans' assessment of their trust or faith in institutions. We've got some significant challenges to deal with in the United States, but today we want to take a more global view of the idea of trust in institutions with our amazing panel. And I'm going to jump right in and go ahead and ask Dr. Lord to comment on your perspective is quite interesting from your running IREX and your background having had positions in government and in a lot of NGOs and think tanks. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing at IREX and what you've learned about faith in institutions and what works.
Great, thanks so much, Glenn. Well, first of all, Glenn asked me to tell you about IREX. We're a global education and nonprofit that works to promote more just, prosperous, and inclusive societies around the world. We work in more than 100 countries, and we're very much focused on investing in people and institutions that help them to thrive. So what we've discovered is that trust is absolutely essential to every part of our mission. But let me answer your question about trust building. The research tells us a few things about why people trust sometimes more than others. The first is that they see institutions are delivering for them. They're fulfilling their promises. So trust by performance is what it's called. The other question that people have when they're looking at institutions is, are these leaders, are these institutions doing things for the right reasons? Are they lining their own pockets? Are they serving their own interests? Or are they actually inclusively looking at their stakeholders and serving them? And then the third thing is, can we have some stable expectations about the future? Can I rely on you? Are you going to be there tomorrow for me? And I think there's a lot to learn there for nonprofits and corporations and others in what we call the third sector that are trying to work for progress and social good. First of all, we have to invest in institutions. We can't work around them. And so often in the third sector, we have this project mentality where we can work around institutions rather than shoring them up. We also need to invest in ethical and effective leaders, and that also means taking a very people-centered approach. Another thing is we have to stick around. We have these short project timelines, we come in and out, but if we want to build trust, we have to be there for the long term. And the last thing I'll say, Glenn, is that we really have to be inclusive. We have to be truly serving all the stakeholders, not just the most powerful, the most privileged, the most visible, or the ones that are part of some particular in-group. And that's what the research tells us, and that's what we at IREX see every day as well.
Thank you. Let me go to Minister Bakari. You're the Foreign Minister of San Marino. I understand that San Marino has the world's oldest continuously running constitution, so that's a very interesting point about your country. You've also served in other senior roles in government. Tell us your perspective from San Marino on this concept of trust in institutions, and perhaps you can also reflect a little bit on what you're seeing in Europe.
Yeah, thank you very much, and good morning to everybody. San Marino is the oldest republic in Europe, maybe in the world, and our institutional framework is very long-standing. The secret of a so long-standing institutional mechanism, is that in San Marino we have a sort of unwritten rule where each power is fully balanced, and there are no institutional body where an individual alone can decide, take decision without a sort of discussion or collegial debate. For instance, in San Marino, there is no prime minister, there is no president of the parliament. That's our element that let the institution more transparent, and the perception of the citizen is they can approve or not what the government or what the majority is doing, but they are confident that there is no mechanism that can be used against them. And but in any case, the national or the domestic dimension now, even in a region like Europe, should be in any case put in relation with what you have around you. San Marino is an enclave in Italy and an enclave in Europe. So for a microstate like San Marino, Monaco, Andorra, Liechtenstein, it's impossible be a third country in a region where you have 27 countries that are united in a European community. So it's very important. Preserve your legal framework and your institutional framework by considering that you need to comply to an external environment, and it is impossible to avoid this.
Thank you. Let me bring in a perspective from Malawi. Attorney General Chikaka Nyirenda, you're one of the youngest attorney generals in the world, probably, and you're a role model for Malawians. But tell us your perspective as the person who's in charge of rule of law for your country. What is your experience and your perspective on faith and institutions from the Malawi perspective?
Thank you so much. Greetings from Malawi. And I think before I go and answer your questions, I know that when I had discussions with the people about Malawi, asking me, where is this Malawi located? Malawi is the reason why Malawi. You don't know more about Malawi is because it has never been at war at all. But it's a beautiful country with a lot of prospects, potential, and actually endowed with the natural features and actually minerals. Yeah, so I think to go straight to your questions about the perspective about Malawi in terms of the rule of law and trust. I know that in terms of building trust with respect to the rule of law, I think I've been said that you cannot have trust if you don't have a set of rules and policies that actually would serve the public interest and also perhaps keep correction of religious corruption. So this, from the perspective of Malawi, what I've seen, actually, when I was appointed Attorney General of the Republic of Malawi, I noted a number of weaknesses, which, of course, we're trying to address. Because we're talking about building trust, we're talking about not only having a set of rules or regulations, but implementation of those rules. And in terms of implementation of those rules, we've got government on one side that is supposed to enforce the law, but it should not be government's duty to enforce the law. The government should not just stop at enforcing the law, but should also take the lead in enforcing the law. But I think from a perspective of Malawi, I would say that there are so many issues that affect trust, as I said, in institutions, several institutions that are created by statutes. So, for example, I'll talk of procurement, public procurement. There are things that are not done properly. They actually go a long way in eroding trust in institutions. So we have an environment where procurement regulations are flouted. When those that actually caught flouting the procurement regulations, they are not punished, and that is rewarded. There is an issue to do with a loss of erosion of trust. So what I've done is that for those institutions who haven't left it to the criminal justice system to deal with those procurement fraud and corruption, we have also gone further to use other means existing in our laws to debar companies or suppliers that have been involved in procurement fraud and corruption. Then we also have those that have benefited illegally from ill-gotten wealth. You know that these are the issues that lead to a loss of trust in institutions. So if people see that you're dealing with an institution and you have benefited and nothing is done with you, there's that loss of trust. So we have taken measures and commenced so many cases against institutions, individuals that have ill-gotten wealth, and actually so many people have their assets or companies' assets forfeited to government and given back to the people. And in a way, we have also gained trust. So I also go on giving examples of how we deal with issues of trust. Because if we're talking about the rule of law, you cannot talk of the rule of law if you don't mention lawyers. So if you have got dodgy lawyers involved in some practices, aiding people to defraud government or actually to defraud citizens, then you have got a problem in actually trust institutions. In this case, it is just the sector. So we have taken measures against those lawyers that have actually been involved in professional misconduct. Like this year, 3 lawyers have been disciplined. 1 has been suspended for 2 years. The others have been disbarred for 10 years. And then, of course, because if you're talking about how you manage resources, as I talked about Malawi being endowed with precious natural resources, valuable natural resources. So we have seen that most of the times, the way you negotiate contracts, the way you manage contracts, in a way leaves the country poorer than it was. So we have put in measures of actually trying to deal with those contracts that were not properly negotiated. Some of them have been renegotiated, some have been terminated, and that also measures to actually come up with contracts that benefit not only the investors, but they also benefit promote the welfare of the people of Malawi. And then, of course, lastly, the thing is that when we're talking about trust, if you have got incompetent people in key positions, there is that inefficiency, ineffectiveness, and that the services that the public is supposed to deliver to the people, when we talk about services, the government institutions, whether globally or locally, they exist for 3 main purposes. So for a public institution, a UN, for example, it will exist to provide benefits to the people.
Right.
It will also exist to prevent harm or to provide opportunities. So if these are not done, there are not measures to do this, then of course there will be that illusion of trust. Yeah, so I think in brief, from the perspective of Malawi, I would go on. I think I'll come back later, but this is what is supposed is key, which should also, you're talking about the US, illusion of trust and the like, should also be adopted and actually, of course, maybe adapted.
No,
but of course, we've got a challenge, yeah.
That idea of rule of law, I think, is one of the most important factors in building faith in institutions. In just the short time we have left, let me just ask both of you quickly to comment on what do you think is the most important thing from your perspective that can be done to improve future strength in institutions? Minister Bakari.
Well, for sure, trust is something that is built on several pillars. Trust in institution, transparency is the main pillar. You have to implement not only a set of international standards or recommendations that each country is committed to do, but you have to act in a way transparent, communication between institution and citizen and resident, because if it's not a matter of be in line or be approve or not what are you doing, but the perception that the person, individuals have is important. The perception that you are acting well, independently, if you are in line or not, that you are honest in what you are doing. So transparency, information, and of course an institutional framework in which the main principle of democracy and are implemented and real and concrete.
Thank you. Dr. Lord.
Well, I know we're out of time, so I'll just be brief. Institutions have to deliver for people. They have to be effective. People have to see the results. And hopefully they'll be part of the decision-making about what kinds of services are provided. But institutions have to be trustworthy. They have to earn the trust from their stakeholders or constituents and from citizens. And if we can help institutions to deliver, we'll see more trust in them.
I think that's a really important point to end on, this idea of strengthening institutions to deliver result. One very disturbing note I found recently in American polling showed that 1/3 of Americans said that they would prefer to have a strong unelected leader to a weak elected one. And I think that is troubling, but it's also very much comes back to this idea that without strong institutions that can deliver, you find yourself on a very slippery slope towards authoritarian type tendencies, even in democracies. Let me just thank you all very much, Dr. Kristen Lord, Minister Luca Beccari, Attorney General Thabo Chikaka and Yorenda. Thank you so much for sharing your perspectives on trust in institutions today. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.